that this Lively would be a main spine, and all roads lead to that Lively as well as to Wooddale 83. So we think it's important, but the timing isn't there yet to start doing the schematic level. Now, if IDOT comes back and says we'll fund some of that, then maybe collaboratively we can get that going. The next thing would be the Middle Drive extension. As you know from the plan and the drawing, Middle Drive is kind of a half a loop. It doesn't loop back into the southeast quadrant. So as you know, we recommended extending it east and then up into Lively. Well, we thought that is still a great idea, but there's no push yet to start the sports complex or the recreation complex, which would need to be triggered to move the ball fields. And then the same thing with the sports complex. Great idea, has a lot of legs, good economic development approach. Until a developer is identified and/or funding, those two kind of work hand in glove, and they don't need to move yet. Now, if somebody steps to the table to go ahead and do something with that, then we can bring that back to for the short term. The last couple things was the overall infrastructure for the quadrant. I think as we talked with you throughout the process and some of the aldermen's question, we don't need to do the whole quadrant right now. There's infrastructure there. Ideally, we're going to do this so that people work together site by site and block by block. So to design and engineer the whole infrastructure doesn't make sense at this time. It'll trigger itself as funding and developers come forward. And then last is some more marketing materials and the wayfinding and signage. You remember the concepts we had in the report. The idea would be, let's get some great signs and things going in there. We thought, of course, that's important, but not right at this minute when we have some of the infrastructure things and zoning to kind of to do right now. So that's a quick overview. If we can do a quick overview with Steve, and then we can open it up for questions.
Thank you, John. We've developed a work plan for work on to create a financing plan that takes off from the work that we did, where we did a first cut on the costs and the revenues and the economic feasibility, and we did one block of the phased plan. We made a number of assumptions, some of which need to be refined, and a number of those refinements are coming from the work that John and Trans-Systems would be doing. Some other refinements would come also. We think we should refine some of the information we have on land acquisition costs. So we're a little smarter than we were when we did the first cut and can get a little more precise about what the real economic issues are and the cost issues are as this plan rolls out between the public costs and the private side and what the private sector generates. And that provides a base then to try to really understand both what the roles are that the public sector might play and what some of the alternative tools are. And so then we are proposing to identify a full range of tools. I know we've had discussions here before about TIF and your concerns about TIF and the resistance or the preference not to use it on some people's part. We're proposing not to take that off the table, but to put that on the table along with other tools. You have an infrastructure sales tax, a non-home rule local option sales tax to be used for infrastructure. We have other tools that are possible to use. We have business district tool. We have special service areas. What we're proposing to do is to analyze and project the potential productivity of different tools and then to create perhaps 3 or 4 scenarios, combinations of tools, and lay out the pluses and minuses, and then work with you guys, work with all of you to go through that and look at what the realities are and the trade-offs are and the concerns and what we have to do in order to make the budget work for infrastructure here. We also have and will look at the kinds of tools that were provided in the ARRA legislation from the federal government. Some of those right now are very time limited, but they do create some additional options. And then, of course, there's additional grant funding that we hope is going to be coming forward because of the relationship of this to the Elgin O'Hare. So we want to bring all those together into a format where we can sit with you and work with you to evaluate the pros and cons of the different tools, and then from that, identify the financing package, the group of tools that we would use in trying to finance the public side of this, the infrastructure side particularly. The last piece is to develop a more detailed action plan where we can lay out what has to be done, who needs to do it, and the timing of that to move to the actual to actual implementation. That would begin to embrace the items that John talked about, but it would also begin to embrace the activities that we might have to undertake in working with property owners to help facilitate deals between property owners, to help property owners to move forward with development projects and so on. And at that point, we'll have a better idea of what that takes and the roles and responsibilities. And then the way we've structured this is that we would like to have significant interaction with the city council so that this is something that that your concerns are fully reflected in, that your opinions and preferences are fully reflected in, and that you understand and have embraced what would be being done then to implement the plan. So we've built in a number of points of interaction, not only with staff, but also with the city council. With that, I think we're ready. We open it to questions.
Well, I think you gentlemen you provided a very easy to understand and comprehensive overview of what Phase 4 is and why it's important. There's a couple of things I want to bring up right away. First, I want to throw my 2 cents in as early on as possible into this process. The stormwater management concept of fee in lieu of, as it relates to sending any water to Salt Creek. I'm going to stand very strong on not increasing any water going to Salt Creek beyond where it is now, and if at all possible and wherever possible in this project, decreasing that amount of water that this particular area might be sending to Salt Creek, if any. If we can manage all of that water in a heavy storm event before having to release it, and help with flooding. I'm one of the aldermen of a ward that floods in a residential zone pretty significantly in heavy rain events, and I can't advocate doing anything to worsen that, and really want to try to make it better. So that's my first thing.
If I could just
please, yeah.
add in there, the intention right now from the planning and the concepts through the plan, and then the next step would be that whole quadrant takes care of itself and doesn't go. I think in lieu of people asked about it, we want to study it. It might be a good model for us to use for our own shared system. But I think you're right. We've got to take care of the business over in the southeast quadrant.
And I thought that we were all on the same page with that. It was a little unclear to me, and I thought for anybody sitting in the audience or watching, I wanted to make it very clear that that's not one of the intentions here, is to move more water to the creek.
Great point.
And then my other issue here, and it was brought up by one of the business owners in the study area at last Wednesday's meet and greet / press conference at Salt Creek Golf Club. What can you tell property and business owners about the conversion to the new zoning, the new schematic diagram, the new road positioning, whose building doesn't really fit into the master plan? I know we're talking about the project's going to build on itself, and it's as long as we continue to follow the primary goals, objectives, and main scheme, that there's room for for some minor change one way or another, but perhaps a business owner whose building is in a key area. What can you say to begin to ease the serious concern about their livelihood?
That's another great question, and I think the fact that people are starting to really focus in on the detail of the plan and seeing where new streets and roads may go or new development, and they may be right in the middle of that. And the idea is not for everybody to be pushed out. The idea is to work with the city day to day on getting ahead of this development and infrastructure that's coming. And I think from Ross's presentation with the IDOT show, it is coming. It's laid out. It's not if anymore. It's when, and it's coming sooner, and it's all good news. And it's not just a point in a line on the map. So the idea would be with the zoning, we're going to have to carefully craft it so that it's picking up the future development while we're still taking care of our existing business residents. And the business folks that we talked to, one of the thoughts was not only coming in sooner than later, if they are ready, come in. If they want to wait until the city catches up with a piece of infrastructure or things started to change because maybe part of the stormwater management system, then they can work the property, work with their neighboring properties as we start to define the blocks. One of the thoughts is maybe it's an overlay for a longer term development with the short term still existing underneath. But it's going to be very transparent, as all the work we've done with you on the TV, on the website, and in the meetings, and we want to work with everybody. And I think some of the folks that realized that, they were a old business park building sitting on a block that now is going to be a complete new mixed-use office building. It's a new day. We just got to work to say what's best for you. Do you want to retire and move? Do you want to stay in the city and do business? Let's find other sites. The good news is you have other sites. That's the key thing. Okay?
Okay, thank you. Alderman Police.
I got a couple of questions. As far as, some of those businesses that are in the quadrant, I know from looking at the previous maps, some of the owners that are in the quadrant also have properties in the other zones. I mean, naturally, there could be land swaps and whatnot that goes on so they can accumulate property in the quadrant, right? I would imagine that happens.
Yes, and also I'd like to add to where we were a minute ago was that one of the thoughts we had, because I think a couple of businesses came up to the mayor and us about 3 or 4 of them maybe working together. If we get 3 or 4 or 5 businesses that need new facilities, that's a project for a developer that's out hungry looking for projects. And we've seen that in other communities where 3 or 4 say, well, I need this, this, and this. I want a bigger facility or better one or more equipment or whatever. And because the plan is mixed and it's got business park in there, that could be the start of a block with 3 or 4 folks working together to get new buildings in.
I continue. Yeah, I know I was talking to one of the developers, actually asked them, and they said, I believe they said they have like 3 or 4 properties on the west side of Wooddale Road. They're pretty close together. I mean, they could easily start making some swaps.
Yep.
So hopefully that'll go in the right direction. But stormwater, they mentioned, I don't know how many acres that Elgin O'Hare is going to do. So basically, our goal is to tell them this is where we would like our stormwater, because I think this is a different watershed. Going to Salt Creek is definitely not an option.
Right, we're going east. Yeah.
And then,
And it's a twofer. It's our development, and then, the expressway has to have its own. So we're hoping it's a combined system that we would work together on. That's share economies of scale and cost in the whole system. So but that's why taking it up to a plan will be great, because then they can see more of the detail.
okay.
Alderman Coles.
Steve, I got a question for you. On these loans and grants and TIF that you're looking at, you can actually try to put something together, but you can't actually get it correct or the full amount, because you don't know how many grants might come in or how many areas that you that they can be developed, and how much money you can borrow, at what percentage that it can be borrowed, because there's going to be some money that's going to have to, on this job, this is not a small project, this is a big project. This is something in, we'll say millions of dollars, or even might be $1 billion by the time it's done.
We hope for $1 billion of property value, but we hope for that
But-
public spending is only in the millions.
But I mean, you'll have to figure out what kind of percentage, if we have to borrow some money, if the city has to borrow, we have to figure out how much percentage, even though the city of Wooddale has a good credit rating, I believe. I think it has one of the better credit ratings around. That would help us.
And the way we approach that, there are a lot of unknowns in a project that's probably going to take 10 years to be built out, or the whole corporate Main Street. We take each possible source. So we'll estimate the value of each phase. It's not going to be precise. The difference between accurate and precise. It'll be accurate enough, and that'll help give us an idea of what we have to work with, and we'll estimate the kinds of revenue potentials that can come from these sources. And then when we try to understand the interest rates in the marketplace, the way we're looking at it, we stay in close communication with the investment bankers, and so we can be in touch with the market. And we also work with, if you use a financial advisor, we work closely with them so we can understand the market. And then we know the market's going to vary at the particular time that we might be having to use the financial markets for funding and public debt. So we try to strike a position of a rate that is not too aggressive, not ridiculously conservative, that it kills our ability to think that we can do anything, but a rate that is similar to what we have seen in normal times, in relatively normal economic times. So in another project that we're working on right now, for example, for tax-exempt financing on that project, this is without a general obligation backing, we're thinking that we might be at about 5.5%. Taxable pieces of that finance, we might be at 7.5%. So we're using a blend to get the order of magnitude of all the economic factors. And then as you get further and further down the road, it gets more and more precise. You start to look at, if we're actually going out into the financing market, for example, there have been, some of these tools have gotten a very bad name in the last few years, justifiably, but we've used, the public sector has used low floater bonds for 30 years, 25 or 30 years, with a hedge, a maximum rate that you know you can afford, but you're paying because you're remarketing these weekly, you're paying a much lower rate. If the market collapses, you know what your top rate's going to be because that's the way they're structured. We're not going to make gross assumptions based on that, our overall assumptions, but we will, as you get to market, you would look at those things. So that's our approach to getting into kind of the middle of where we think the markets are going to be.
Okay, one other question. This is phase 4. How many phases do you think you might have?
Of work of our consulting team?
I would say, as far as the city quarterbacking this, this is it, because eventually you're going to come to the crossroads with a developer, a business, or an engineering, and then who goes forward with like engineering of the Main Street. That's
Okay.
way down the road. Ideally, because we've talked about this, you set the table, and then someone comes in and they build that first piece leg of the street, just like if somebody did half a street until the other guy.
I was just curious. Thank you.
I think there'll be specific tasks that you will potentially think that it's appropriate that members of this team perform, but that's under your control. So as you look at it and as you look at the reality of implementing the project, I don't want to be too cute about that. John.
Yeah, I mean, it's setting the stage, and then down the pipe, it's, what is going on at that point in about 6 months when these start to come online with either businesses, developers, landowners wanting to make a swap or a move, and we go from there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Alderman Lewitton?
Thank you. Mr. Lamond and Mr. Friedman, I want to say I think your first work has been very good, and it's certainly helped us in getting IDOT to pay attention to Wooddale. Before I make any comments or anything, could Ross, Mr. Klinger, could you put on the map for a second, because page 5 of 9, I'm sorry, not page 5 of 9, page 1 of 9 shows the limits of the project. Could you just put that project, it's called here project boundaries. Could you just put it on for a second so I can make reference to a specific point?
You're talking about our project, not IDOT's.
Your project.
Yeah, okay.
Right. Well, that's going on. I notice, John Cadala and I are both in agreement that, you've done good work so far. And now I'm questioning the timing of this. Steve, if I may call you by your first name, Mr. Friedman, you said that, and just a few seconds ago, you said 10 years, in the next 10 years. And in one of the documents we received, it said this plan won't come to fruition for 10 to 15 years. And also in the slide projection show that we just had, movie that we just saw, it said that even right now, IDOT hasn't decided whether to go with the nodule 203 or 403. So there's a lot of ifs, ands, and maybes in there. If you could point to the exact upper boundary, it says north corporate limits, south of Devon Avenue. Could you show Devon Avenue there? Okay, show Wooddale Avenue.
And Wooddale's right in the center, and then 83 is on the east side.
Okay, what development do you have for Devon Avenue and Wooddale? Point to it with your pen. Devon and Wooddale.
There's no development shown in the northwest quadrant.
Is it, do you have preference for what goes in up there?
Well, the conclusion was that the business park was fairly new, and
John, yeah, I was going to ask you, thanks.
the conclusion was that that quadrant, as well as the southwest quadrant, a little bit of the northeast quadrant, were fairly new, fairly modern facilities, and were fairly full with tenants, and that there was no need to redevelop. And then our program, our development program, pretty much filled in almost the house southeast quadrant. Now, that doesn't mean that you would revisit this and something could change overnight, but this is a pretty solid business park area there.
Well, the reason I bring that up is because this is a program that's a project to show a development for the whole northern part of the city. And yet, nobody is making reference to that when we discuss land usage in those areas. I want to remind everybody that last committee meeting, we voted on and approved a gas station in that corridor right where Mr. Lamont is pointing to. Yet in all of our discussions, not one person mentioned what the impact would be to the overall plan that we just spent a couple $100,000 to pay for. And I'm just wondering why we are paying them this money and developing these programs if there's absolutely no integration of them with our voting for different entities that will occupy the land in those areas. And in conjunction with that, part of the cost of this new program, Phase 4, is for the development of ordinances. And I'd like to point out on this very same agenda for tonight, we are going to discuss future meetings on Land Vision, the Unified Development Ordinance. I think we spent a lot of thousands of dollars to have an independent company called Land Vision develop a unified development ordinance for our city, and now we're going to pay them to redo what we just paid, how much? $100,000 to do? Am I correct on that? So we're duplicating work that's already been done. We're not incorporating any of their advice into what we're doing. And I feel that maybe we ought to postpone doing any development for it this time. And one of the reasons I have for it is that. And another reason that I have is that right now we need our money to work on what I call the FWSI, flood and water safety improvements. We had visitors from Ward 2, Mr. Alderman Cadala's ward, come in here and want solutions to the flooding problems on Salt Creek. And all of a sudden, we said, "Oh, we're going to spend the money. We're going to put it into the budget. We're going to do a study." We're doing this like on an ad hoc basis. There's no integration into the whole program for an overall study that's boom, 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 A, B, C, D. And I certainly think that money ought to be spent to clear up our potable water. And I've mentioned that for 2 years now. And the other thing is, I'd like to make a statement of my personal belief about land development. And that is, there are two types of investors in land. And they are speculators and land users. And when you put out there that you're going to take 10 or 15 years, as Mr. Friedman said, for all this to come to fruition, you're creating speculators. Because land users aren't going to come into any area where they're not sure what's going on. And as everybody in the council knows, and the people voted for me in Ward 4, that's the position that I ran on, because we had this project to build Irving Park Road north of north of Irving Park Road, and we were going to tear down all these buildings, and we were going to do everything. And I'm going to tell you, for about 5 years, my wife and I wouldn't put any money into our house. Now that we know that the house isn't going to be destroyed by a demolition truck, you know, my wife's put in new flooring, bought new carpeting, wants to upgrade the bathroom, do different things around the house, that for 5 years we wouldn't touch. We wouldn't put a penny in because we knew it wouldn't increase the land value and we wouldn't get any more out of the government buyers who come in to buy the property. And it's the same thing for the people up there who own property in the northern quadrant, in that area that you want to develop. You're telling them for 10 or 15 years, we don't know what the value of your property is. So what happens to the value of the property? It sinks. And who wants to come in on that? Speculators. Speculators who want to say, well, that's going to happen. That's the same thing that happened with the airport at Peatone. Drop the land value. People can't sell homes. People can't sell businesses because there's no confirmed decision making. And I want to point back out what we did with the Thornton. We did the same thing on Walnut Street, on Walnut Avenue. There was a vacant lot that went for $15,000. It's the third house north of Commercial. That would have been prime land that would have been needed for the road that went north of Irving Park Road. And what did we do? Now, this happened before I was on this committee. You voted to let them put up a $385,000 house so we could spend maybe $400,000 to buy back what we could have bought for $85,000. It's poor planning. The same thing is all integrated in my thinking that what we're doing is increasing speculation. We're forcing down the value of commercial property in that area because the land users aren't going to come in. The people who are there, yes, they're going to stay if they're going to use the land. But those people who want to sell, they're not going to be able to sell unless they want to sell it to a speculator for a speculator's price. So until IDOT comes in and says we're going to do 203 or we're going to do 403, until they start laying ground, until 5 years goes by when maybe development is feasible because we're not going to integrate anything into something that's not out there yet, I think we should put this on the shelf and not spend $151,000 for this project. I was listening to one of our shows that we put on when we were talking about the land usage, and nobody talked about the cost of it until the very end, and Alderman Shockey said, well, what's it going to cost? And then they said $150,000 or $200,000, and then we said, well, okay, let's go ahead and pass it. I just think we ought to step back, table this, and do a lot more thinking about it, but we ought to wait till it's closer to the time when it's a viable well, I don't know what I want to say, but something that becomes a fruition. It's viable to become a fruition. And that's for those reasons, I would vote no for any expenditure at this time, and I would prefer to table it until such time as IDOT is more complete on their project, we're closer to it, maybe 5 years out, when we know, when we can settle back and let the land values increase, and people can know that it's a possibility, but people who want to sell now can sell without being beaten to death on the cost. And that's my personal philosophy on what we're doing. And I thank you for letting me speak. And anybody, if you want to comment on those, I'd appreciate a rebuttal.
Actually, Ross, before you take it, I think if I understand, there's about 5 major points that Alderman Lewitton made, and I kind of hoping we can take them more or less in order. Can we begin by discussing the issue of that corner of Wooddale Road and Devon being in the initial conceptual study area, but well outside of what we have collectively, as a council and committee, decided we were going to focus on? So,
Correct. As you clearly stated there, the corner of Wooddale and Devon was not, although it was in part of the study, we did evaluate it. The results came back that the development area up there was minimal due to the age of most of the industrial buildings that are up there, the age, the type of structure that they are. The 1 acre parcel that was left for development up there was zone business, and that's actually what we approved, or what the council approved last week, was a business use on that parcel. We've always been focusing on the southeast quadrant for this plan because of the age of the structures, the type of structures, and the general infrastructure of that area.
address the next part of that, which is, are we making decisions arbitrarily with respect to properties outside the bullseye that have adverse or positive effects on the area with inside the bullseye?
I don't think we're acting adversely to that. The approval of the Thornton's gas station brings a retail aspect to the northern edge of the community that we haven't had. It will serve not only the residents that are right there in the Bristol Park Townhome, but it will also service the industrial park, residents outside, or visitors that come from outside the community, and will actually be an asset to the development that happens in the southeast quadrant.
Okay, Mr. Lamont or Mr. Friedman, any comments on the same issue?
Alderman, I'd just like to clarify, again, the mission we were on. You, as a at every land use, transportation, infrastructure issue, stormwater issue in the whole study area. That was the mission you gave us in the beginning. You said, look at it neutral, look at it objective, and look at it long range. And look at it, what do we need today, and then what do we need when this expressway comes through? And as we have said, and we've learned together, this is real. This is coming. It's not 20 years down the road. This expressway is being designed and engineered, and it's coming sooner than later. Now, the good news is, again, like I mentioned the other night, you have worked with IDOT to get all the right-of-way set. So there's no speculation in here about, oh, the road may go over my building, the road may take me. No more. The road is going inside that right-of-way, okay? Then we say, okay, what do you need in the area today? If you just said the expressway wasn't even coming, this quadrant, southwest and the northwest, are in great shape, almost all full, very little bit of vacant land, very little bit of vacant buildings, and they're fairly new and modern. When Steve and his people went through and then looked at the market in the future, he came up with some really great future densities and uses, but we would never fill this whole quadrant up, so we didn't recommend that you clear all three quadrants. We got everything in here, and we found the southeast quadrant to be older, obsolete, vacancies, vacant buildings, loading off the front, off the streets, all the things we talked about during the process. So this was the targeted area. So this is good news. This is an area, much like other areas that have developed 30 years ago as industrial areas, that needs development. So basically, you said as a council, here's our plan, this is where we're going to go. Don't come in with a hot dog stand on the corner or with a bunker business park building here. This is the future redevelopment we're going to go. So the folks inside this zone here, their future, that's property, is they're going to have hotel, shops, office, corporate stuff on the site. Down here would be a continuation of business park, but new and modern. So you're planning ahead, and as we said in the report, 10 to 15 years is a horizon that once this all fills in. But development could start tomorrow. That's the good news about this plan. It's very feasible. It's very doable. Some of the developers, landowners that have been coming to the meetings can start on these corners now. And so the speculation is, hey, you've got direction. You've got a vision for this community. And this is where it could go. And the expressway is coming.
What we did was to focus on the area that was susceptible to change because of the conditions that John spoke of. This is the area where redevelopment is more economically feasible because the land values are already lower than the area that's in better condition and more modern. There would be speculation here anyway. That road, if you focus a bit more on IDOT's options, there are not options through here. The options are elsewhere. It's the east where the options are. It's the south connection, and whether it's York Road or a full interstate type highway all the way back up to 90. They are starting, even though they haven't finished the EIS, they're actually starting design to go to the 30% level on the parts where they have focused in on a single alternative. The CH2M Hill, which is the design engineer, is negotiating right now their contract to go to the 30% level. This road and the timing of this road are about as certain as you're ever likely to see for a major public infrastructure project of this scale. They're targeted to get this done by 2014 or 15, in that range, and they are moving that way. Could it stop? I suppose anything could stop, but this is as firm a public infrastructure commitment as I can really imagine for a major project like this. So the speculation is going to go on anyway. So what we've done actually, I think, could benefit the existing property owners. You're right, they have a problem with whether they invest, if they have to make an investment right now. That's where they have the biggest problem. If they just want to run their business and sort of keep their powder dry for the best, for a high offer, they're okay. But if they have to expand, or if they were going to expand, or they need to put a new roof on, they have a dilemma. That's a problem. But the other side is an opportunity. Because what we're doing with this plan is creating a higher value environment. The speculators who are going to be swarming around anyway, and will be looking at areas that have currently lower values anyway, are going to know that they can build a higher value property here, and that, to an informed seller, should result in a higher value to that seller for the land. And believe me, the sellers should be able to become educated about that possibility and get themselves good brokers to help them negotiate those deals. So I think that the plan being in place, the zoning, the entitlements being in place, will increase the value of for the sellers in what is going to intrinsically be a speculative environment. The buyers, the speculators, are convinced this highway is coming, and they're coming.
Thank you. Alderman Police, as the chairman, I want to ensure that we get through all of Alderman Lewitton's well-thought-out concerns. So you had your hand up. Did you want to speak on the effect of the affected area decision? Yeah, okay, please go ahead.
Maybe staff can answer, Mr. Lamont or Mr. Friedman. In the area, I remember going to one of these meetings when we first got on the council. First meeting, I think, was at the Doubletree. And at that time, if I recall, there was no interchange. Only interchange I saw was 83 and maybe where 53 is now. In your opinion, if we wouldn't have come up with a plan, would this have been the Elgin O'Hare bypass of Wooddale? Or now do we have an interchange at Wooddale Road, and Top Golf is also being taken care of, and Salt Creek? Would these have been taken care of if we were not proactive in this process?
Probably not, because what happens is when they're laying out the expressway extensions or the rehab of the expressway further down, they go community by community, because we met with them, and this is how they do it, and I've seen it, and we've been involved in other areas. And they ask, what is your plan? And they usually are handed a comprehensive plan that's older, there's not a lot of direction there, and they kind of piece together what they think is going to happen. And if you remember the first drawing we saw from them, they were just connecting to the local streets because they saw no change in that business park. Some of them were the angle streets, they were little stubs, and they didn't see any vision or redevelopment. So it's basically, here's what it is. The lively main entrance into the whole development came out of this process. They're really making sure there's a Wooddale access point. They're making sure that the golf course wasn't negatively impacted. The potential for moving the transit station around. Before, they were just looking at the map and placing dots.